Welcome to my little corner of the world, to Betty's stories. I share these moments not for sympathy, but for strength, my own and hopefully yours. I'm Betty, and if you've ever felt your kindness was taken for weakness, then you and we already understand each other. I'd love to hear your heart in the comments. The first knock was not a gentle tap, 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 the kind a neighbor makes when returning a borrowed pie dish. It was a series of heavy, determined thuds that shook the front door of my small, quiet bungalow, a sound that felt less like a request and more like a demand. It was 7:30 on a Saturday morning. The sun was just beginning to weave its golden threads through the lace curtains David had helped me hang a lifetime ago. This was my sacred time, the peaceful hours with my tea, my memories, and the quiet hum of a life I had painstakingly built from the ashes of loss. My name is Alina. For 72 years, I've navigated the joys and sorrows of this life, and for the last 10, I've been doing it alone. David, my rock, my laughter, my best friend, was taken from me far too soon by a swift and cruel illness. The grief was an ocean, and for a long time I felt I was drowning. But this house, this small, two-bedroom bungalow with its overgrown rose bushes and slightly crooked shutters, was my life raft. It was the last place we were happy together. Every scuff on the hardwood floor told a story of our life. Every smudge on the kitchen wall was a ghost of a memory. It wasn't just a house. It was my sanctuary, the living, breathing museum of our love. I opened the door, my old floral robe pulled tightly around me, and the sight on my porch stole the breath from my lungs. There stood my son, Jonathan, my Jonathan, the boy whose scraped knees I had kissed, whose science projects I had stayed up late gluing, the man I had wept with pride over at his graduation. Beside him was his wife, Chloe, a woman whose smile never quite seemed to reach her eyes, and at their feet were suitcases. Not weekend bags, but large, hard-shelled suitcases, the kind you take on a long, transatlantic journey. "Jonathan," I managed, my voice still rough with sleep. What is all this? Is everything all right?" He didn't step forward to hug me. He didn't smile. He looked past me into the dim hall of my home, his gaze assessing, calculating. "Mom," he said, his tone brisk, businesslike, "we're here, we've had some setbacks. This is going to be our new home for a while." The words hung in the crisp morning air, so absurd I almost laughed. I looked at Chloe, who offered a tight, perfunctory smile. "It's so good to see you, Alina," she said, but her eyes were already scanning the porch, the yard, judging, always judging. "Your new home," I repeated, feeling a slow, cold dread begin to uncoil in my stomach. "Jonathan, what are you talking about? What setbacks? Why didn't you call?" He finally looked at me, but there was no warmth in his eyes, only a steely resolve I didn't recognize. "It's a long story, Mom. Can we please come in? It's cold out here." It was a simple request, but it felt like a violation. They didn't wait for a proper invitation. Jonathan picked up two of the largest suitcases and brushed past me, his shoulder nudging mine. Chloe followed, her high heels clicking a sharp, invasive rhythm on my beloved hardwood floors. I stood there, frozen in my own doorway, watching them march into my living room as if they were returning from a long voyage, not arriving unannounced at the dawn of a peaceful day. They dropped the bags in the middle of the living room, right on the worn Persian rug David and I had bought on our trip to Morocco decades ago. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air thinner. "So," Jonathan said, clapping his hands together as if concluding a business deal, "we'll take the main bedroom, of course. We need the space. You can have the smaller one. It's not like you need much room." The main bedroom. My bedroom. The room that still held the faint, cherished scent of David's cologne in the wardrobe. The room with the bay window where we'd spent countless mornings drinking coffee and planning our days. The room where he had taken his last, peaceful breath. I felt a wave of dizziness. This wasn't a request. It wasn't a discussion. It was a declaration. An occupation. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. This was my son, the child I had raised with all the love in my heart, standing in the home his father had built for us, telling me, not asking me, that he was evicting me from my own life. The cold dread in my stomach solidified into a hard, cold knot of fear. This was not a visit. This was a takeover. And the unthinkable thought, the one that would come to define the following weeks, whispered in the back of my mind. My son didn't come home for shelter. He came for my house. The silence that settled over my bungalow after their arrival was not one of peace, but of profound displacement. I stood in my own living room, a ghost in my home, as Jonathan and Chloe began their inventory. Their eyes, sharp and acquisitive, scanned every belonging, every piece of furniture, every knick-knack, not with nostalgia, but with appraisal. I felt like a museum curator watching new owners decide what to keep and what to discard. "We'll need to move this," Chloe stated, pointing a manicured finger at the large, comfortable armchair by the fireplace, David's chair. "It blocks the light. And this rug," she added, towing the Moroccan rug with her shoe, "is really quite worn. We'll look into replacing it." I found my voice, a thin, reedy thing. "That was your father's chair, and we bought that rug on our 20th anniversary." Jonathan waved a dismissive hand. "It's just stuff, Mom. We need to make the space functional for us now." For us, the words were a door slammed in my face. There was no we that included me. I was part of the old, worn-out stuff that needed to be managed. Without another word, I retreated to the kitchen, my hands trembling as I filled the kettle. The familiar ritual of making tea was a desperate anchor in a world that had suddenly capsized. My small bedroom, the one I had used as a sewing room and a sanctuary for my books, was now my entire world. Jonathan and Chloe had indeed taken my room. I had barely managed to salvage a few of my most personal items, David's photograph, my jewelry box, a few favorite books, before they started moving their sleek, modern suitcases in. The rest of my clothes were unceremoniously stuffed into garbage bags and placed in the corner of the small room. The humiliation was a hot flush on my cheeks. Later that day, the setbacks were revealed. Over a tense lunch at my own kitchen table, Jonathan laid it out with a chilling matter-of-factness. "The startup failed," he said, pushing his food around his plate. Chloe had taken one look at the simple soup I'd made and declared she wasn't hungry. "The investors pulled out. We lost everything we put in. The apartment lease was up, and we couldn't secure a new one with our credit now." My heart, a mother's heart, initially ached for him. "Oh, Jonathan, I'm so sorry. That's terrible." "It is what it is," he shrugged, but his eyes were hard. "The important thing is that we have a solid foundation here to rebuild." He looked directly at me. "This house is paid off, right? No mortgage." The question was a cold splash of water. "Yes," I said slowly. "Your father and I paid it off years ago." "Good," he nodded, a satisfied gleam in his eye. "That's good. A solid asset, no debt." The way he said asset made my skin crawl. He wasn't seeing a home, he was seeing a balance sheet. Chloe finally spoke, her voice sweet yet laced with steel. "Eleanor, it must be such a relief for you at your age to have us here. This big house all alone, it's too much for you. We can take care of things now. Handle the bills, the maintenance, you can just relax." The condescension was a physical blow. At your age, I was being gently, firmly put out to pasture in my own home. They were framing their invasion as a benevolent takeover for my own good. That evening, the first concrete change happened. I was in the kitchen, washing the dishes, when Jonathan came in holding my landline phone and my checkbook. "Mom, from now on, I'll handle all the finances," he announced, placing them in a kitchen drawer and pocketing the key. "You don't need the stress. Chloe and I will take care of everything. We've already set up a new, joint account for the household expenses to streamline things." I stared at him, my soapy hands frozen in the warm water. "Jonathan, that's my checkbook. Those are my accounts. Your father." "My father would have wanted me to take care of you," he interrupted, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "And this is how I do it. It's for your own protection." The finality in his tone was absolute. I was no longer the mistress of my own home, the CEO of my own life. I had been demoted to a dependent, a guest who had overstayed her welcome in a property that was now under new management. As I stood there, my hands turning prunny in the water, I realized the terrifying truth. The locks on my doors hadn't changed, but the locks on my life had. My son hadn't just moved in. He had begun a systematic, silent coup. Part 3, The Siege Within Approx. 1,000 words. The following weeks settled into a grim new routine, a slow-motion erosion of my autonomy that was as meticulous as it was cruel. My bungalow, once a place of solace, became a gilded cage where I was both prisoner and unpaid domestic staff. The siege was not with shouts and threats, but with quiet pronouncements and a steady, suffocating takeover of every facet of my daily life. It began with the kitchen. My kitchen, the heart of my home, with its well-seasoned cast-iron skillet and the collection of China David I had picked out piece by piece. Chloe declared it unhygienically outdated. One afternoon, I came home from a walk, a desperate attempt to find breathing room, to find a stranger installing a sleek, water-dispensing refrigerator. My old one, with its magnet-held photos of Jonathan as a boy and a faded drawing from his third-grade class, was already hauled out to the curb. "Jonathan," I cried out, my voice trembling with a mix of shock and fury. "What is the meaning of this?" He emerged from the living room, looking annoyed at my outburst. "It's just a refrigerator, Mom. The old one was an energy hog. We're modernizing." "With my money," the question slipped out, sharp and accusatory. His face tightened. "It's household money now, for the household's benefit. You want your grandson to have a safe, modern home, don't you?" He always did that, framed their greed as concern for a future grandchild, a grandchild that was, as of yet, only a theoretical concept Chloe used as a trump card. I looked at the new, hulking stainless steel appliance. It was cold and impersonal, just like them. My kitchen was no longer mine. The recipes I'd cooked for decades were now deemed too salty or too fatty. Chloe took over the grocery shopping, filling my pantry with organic, flavorless foods I didn't recognize and couldn't afford. My social life was the next casualty. My dear friend, Martha, called one evening for our weekly chat. Jonathan answered, and from my small room, I heard his side of the conversation. "No, Martha, she's resting. She's been very frail lately. Yes, the doctor said she needs to avoid stress. No, I don't think bridge club is a good idea. We're taking care of her. Don't worry." He was cutting me off from my support system, painting a picture of a feeble, infirm old woman to the outside world. When I confronted him, he was ready. "Mom, those women just gossip. They're a bad influence. And all that driving at night for you, it's not safe. We're just protecting you." The most painful violation, however, was the slow erasure of David. One weekend, they decided the living room needed a more minimalist aesthetic. David's beloved armchair was moved to the dank, unheated garage. The bookshelves filled with his favorite novels were boxed up and labeled for storage. The framed photograph of us on our wedding day that had sat on the mantelpiece for 45 years was replaced by a stark, expensive-looking abstract painting Chloe had bought. I found the photo face down in a drawer in the hallway. I picked it up, my vision blurring with tears. I traced the glass over David's smiling face. "I'm so sorry," I whispered. "I'm trying to be strong." My life shrank to the dimensions of my tiny room. I ate my meals in there, mostly alone, as they often ordered takeout for themselves, the smell of rich food a taunt from under my door. I felt myself becoming smaller, quieter, a ghost in the narrative they were writing for me. The vibrant, capable woman I had been was fading, replaced by a nervous, hesitant shadow who jumped at the sound of their voices. The breaking point, the moment the spark of rebellion finally ignited in my soul, came on a Tuesday. I overheard Jonathan and Chloe talking in the living room, their voices carrying through the thin walls. They thought I was napping. "The equity in this place is substantial," Jonathan was saying. "Once we get our credit rebuilt, we could get a line of credit, remodel the entire kitchen and bath properly, maybe even add a second story." "And what about her?" Chloe asked, her voice low. "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it," Jonathan replied, his tone chillingly casual. "There's always a senior living community. She'll see it's for the best. She can't manage this place forever." Senior living community. The words were a death sentence. They weren't just visiting. They weren't just recovering. They were planning a future in my home, a future that had no place for me. They saw me not as a mother, but as an obstacle between them and their desired asset. I sat on the edge of my bed, my hands clenched into fists. The fear that had been my constant companion began to curdle into a cold, hard rage. David did not work his whole life to leave me this house so that I could be gently shoved into a home by my own son. This was not his legacy. This was my war. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel weak. I felt a steely resolve settle in my bones. The siege was on, but the defender was finally ready to fight back. Part 3, The Siege Within Approx. 1,000 words. The following weeks settled into a grim new routine, a slow-motion erosion of my autonomy that was as meticulous as it was cruel. My bungalow, once a place of solace, became a gilded cage where I was both prisoner and unpaid domestic staff. The siege was not with shouts and threats, but with quiet pronouncements and a steady, suffocating takeover of every facet of my daily life. It began with the kitchen. My kitchen, the heart of my home, with its well-seasoned cast-iron skillet and the collection of China David and I had picked out piece by piece. Chloe declared it unhygienically outdated. One afternoon, I came home from a walk, a desperate attempt to find breathing room, to find a stranger installing a sleek, water-dispensing refrigerator. My old one, with its magnet-held photos of Jonathan as a boy and a faded drawing from his third-grade class, was already hauled out to the curb. "Jonathan," I cried out, my voice trembling with a mix of shock and fury. "What is the meaning of this?" He emerged from the living room, looking annoyed at my outburst. "It's just a refrigerator, Mom. The old one was an energy hog. We're modernizing." "With my money," the question slipped out, sharp and accusatory. His face tightened. "It's household money now, for the household's benefit. You want your grandson to have a safe, modern home, don't you?" He always did that, framed their greed as concern for a future grandchild, a grandchild that was, as of yet, only a theoretical concept Chloe used as a trump card. I looked at the new, hulking stainless steel appliance. It was cold and impersonal, just like them. My kitchen was no longer mine. The recipes I'd cooked for decades were now deemed too salty or too fatty. Chloe took over the grocery shopping, filling my pantry with organic, flavorless foods I didn't recognize and couldn't afford. My social life was the next casualty. My dear friend, Martha, called one evening for our weekly chat. Jonathan answered, and from my small room, I heard his side of the conversation. "No, Martha, she's resting. She's been very frail lately. Yes, the doctor said she needs to avoid stress. No, I don't think bridge club is a good idea. We're taking care of her. Don't worry." He was cutting me off from my support system, painting a picture of a feeble, infirm old woman to the outside world. When I confronted him, he was ready. "Mom, those women just gossip. They're a bad influence. And all that driving at night for you, it's not safe. We're just protecting you." The most painful violation, however, was the slow erasure of David. One weekend, they decided the living room needed a more minimalist aesthetic. David's beloved armchair was moved to the dank, unheated garage. The bookshelves filled with his favorite novels were boxed up and labeled for storage. The framed photograph of us on our wedding day that had sat on the mantelpiece for 45 years was replaced by a stark, expensive-looking abstract painting Chloe had bought. I found the photo face down in a drawer in the hallway. I picked it up, my vision blurring with tears. I traced the glass over David's smiling face. "I'm so sorry," I whispered. "I'm trying to be strong." My life shrank to the dimensions of my tiny room. I ate my meals in there, mostly alone, as they often ordered takeout for themselves, the smell of rich food-a-taunt from under my door. I felt myself becoming smaller, quieter, a ghost in the narrative they were writing for me. The vibrant, capable woman I had been was fading, replaced by a nervous, hesitant shadow who jumped at the sound of their voices. The breaking point, the moment the spark of rebellion finally ignited in my soul, came on a Tuesday. I overheard Jonathan and Chloe talking in the living room, their voices carrying through the thin walls. They thought I was napping. "The equity in this place is substantial," Jonathan was saying. "Once we get our credit rebuilt, we could get a line of credit, remodel the entire kitchen and bath properly, maybe even add a second story." "And what about her?" Chloe asked, her voice low. "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it," Jonathan replied, his tone chillingly casual. "There's always a senior living community. She'll see it's for the best. She can't manage this place forever. Senior living community. The words were a death sentence. They weren't just visiting. They weren't just recovering. They were planning a future in my home, a future that had no place for me. They saw me not as a mother, but as an obstacle between them and their desired asset. I sat on the edge of my bed, my hands clenched into fists. The fear that had been my constant companion began to curdle into a cold, hard rage. David did not work his whole life to leave me this house so that I could be gently shoved into a home by my own son. This was not his legacy. This was my war. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel weak. I felt a steely resolve settle in my bones. The siege was on, but the defender was finally ready to fight back. The cold rage that had settled in my bones after overhearing their plans was different from any emotion I had ever known. It wasn't a hot, screaming fury that would have consumed me and left me ashen. No, this was a quiet, calculating chill that sharpened my senses and cleared the fog of despair they had wrapped around me. They thought they were dealing with a frail, defeated old woman. It was time to show them they were wrong. My first act of rebellion was small, almost pathetic in its simplicity. I waited until Jonathan and Chloe had left for one of their mysterious meetings, likely with a loan officer or real estate agent I now suspected. The house was silent, but the silence felt different now. It was no longer oppressive, it was tactical. I walked into the living room, my heart hammering not with fear, but with purpose. I went straight to the stark, soulless painting Chloe had hung and took it down. Then I retrieved our wedding photo from the drawer, polished the glass with the hem of my cardigan, and placed it back in its rightful place on the mantel. It was a small thing, a token. But as I looked at David's smiling face, I felt him there, urging me on. Our home, Eleanor. Fight for our home. When they returned, Chloe noticed it immediately. Her lips pursed into a thin, disapproving line. Eleanor, I moved that for a reason. It clashes with the new aesthetic. I was sitting in the one remaining armchair, knitting, an activity I had taken up not for pleasure, but as a prop to make me look passive and occupied. I didn't look up from my needles. It's my favorite photograph, I said, my voice calm and even. It stays. The silence that followed was electric. I could feel their shock from across the room. It was the first time I had directly and calmly defied them. Mom, Jonathan began, his tone that of a patient parent addressing a stubborn child. We're trying to create a cohesive look here. I finally looked up, meeting his gaze squarely. This is my house, Jonathan. My living room, my mantelpiece, my photograph stays. The word "my" hung in the air, a declaration of ownership they had tried to make me forget. Jonathan's face flushed with irritation, but he was clearly thrown by my newfound assertiveness. He wasn't used to pushback. He muttered something under his breath and stalked out of the room. Chloe shot me a look of pure venom before following him. I had drawn a line in the sand. It was a small one, but it was mine. The next battle was over the finances. The following morning, I waited until Jonathan had left the house. I then went to the kitchen drawer. It was locked, as expected. A few days prior, during one of my naps, I had quietly rummaged through Jonathan's desk and found the key, taking a quick impression in a bar of soap. A quick trip to the hardware store during my aimless walk had yielded a duplicate. My hands trembled only slightly as I slipped it into the lock. It turned with a satisfying click. I retrieved my checkbook and bank statements. A quick review made my blood run colder than the new refrigerator. There were transfers to accounts I didn't recognize, large payments to furniture stores, and a pending application for a home equity line of credit. They were moving faster than I had imagined. I took photos of everything with the cheap, prepaid phone I had secretly purchased, my new most valuable asset. I then carefully placed everything back, locking the drawer behind me. Knowledge was power, and I was finally arming myself. The confrontation came that evening. Jonathan approached me, his expression a mask of forced calm. Mom, I noticed the bank statements were out of order. Have you been in the drawer? I needed to check something, I said, not elaborating. Mom, we talked about this, he said, his voice rising. I am handling the finances. You cannot just go through things. This is exactly the kind of confusion we're trying to avoid. This is exactly the kind of theft I am trying to stop, I replied, my voice dangerously quiet. The word theft landed like a physical blow. His mask of benevolent concern shattered. Theft! I'm trying to save this family. I'm trying to secure our future. You're sitting on a goldmine here, completely oblivious while your son is drowning. I am not an ATM, Jonathan. This is not your inheritance to liquidate while I'm still breathing. You're being selfish, he roared, his face contorted with a rage I had never seen in him before. You had your life. This is mine now. You're just too old and selfish to see it. The words should have eviscerated me. Instead, they solidified my resolve. He had finally shown me his true face, stripped of all pretense of care. It was ugly and it was greedy. I see everything perfectly clearly now, I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. And you will not touch another dime of my money without my explicit permission. Is that understood? He stared at me, chest heaving, looking for a moment like he wanted to strike me. Then, with a sound of disgust, he turned and slammed his fist into the wall, leaving a dent in the plaster before storming out. I stood alone in the aftermath, the echo of the slam reverberating through the house. The battle lines were now drawn in blood. The quiet mother was gone. The warrior for her own life had arrived. I knew then it was only going to get worse. But for the first time, I was ready. The slammed door and the dent in the wall were not just marks of Jonathan's rage. They were a declaration of war. The thin veneer of caring for Mom had been ripped away, revealing the brutal truth beneath. I stood in the silent living room, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but my mind was preternaturally calm. The fear was still there, a cold snake coiled in my stomach, but it was now outweighed by a clear, sharp purpose. I could not win a physical confrontation. I could not win a shouting match. My victory would have to be one of wit, patience, and secret strength. My small bedroom was no longer a prison. It was my command center. The first thing I did was call Martha from my prepaid phone, my voice a hushed whisper as I confessed the entire sordid situation. There was a long silence on the other end, followed by a string of words David would have blushed to hear. "Eleanor, you get out of there right now. Come stay with me." "I can't, Martha," I whispered. "If I leave, I may never get back in, and this is my home, but I need your help." She became my first and most crucial ally. She was my eyes and ears on the outside, the keeper of my most important documents. The next day, during my walk, I met her at the library. I handed her a manila envelope containing the deed to my house, my marriage certificate, David's will, my passport, and the originals of the bank statements I had photographed. "Keep these safe," I said, my hands trembling only slightly. "If they find these in the house, it's over." "Of course, dear," she said, her eyes full of fierce determination. "What else?" "Research," I said. "I need to know my rights. I need to find a lawyer, a good one, a pit bull." Martha, a retired librarian, nodded, her fingers already itching for a keyboard. "Consider it done." My next move was financial guerrilla warfare. Jonathan had control of the main checking account, but he had, arrogantly, left me with my own, older savings account that was linked to a separate, forgotten bank branch across town. He likely saw the modest balance and deemed it insignificant. It was my lifeblood. I went there in person, explaining my situation, in vague terms, to a kind, older bank manager named Mr. Henderson. His eyes grew wide with understanding as I spoke. With his help, I severed all electronic links to that account, ensured all statements would be paper only, and sent to a P.O. box Martha helped me rent, and changed all my security questions to answers Jonathan could never guess. My mother's maiden name, the name of my first pet, things from a life long before he was born. I also began a careful, physical inventory of everything in the house. I used the camera on my secret phone to document every room, every piece of jewelry, every piece of silverware that David and I had collected. I had a gut feeling that when this came to a head, things would start to disappear. I needed proof of what was mine. Living with the enemy required a new level of performance. I had to make them believe they had broken me, that my one small act of defiance had been a final, futile gasp. I became the picture of subdued defeat. I stayed in my room. I spoke only when spoken to. I cooked the bland meals Chloe requested without complaint. I let Jonathan's condescending remarks about my confusion and stubbornness wash over me without reaction. I was playing a long game, and every flinch, every downcast eye, was a move on the chessboard. The tension in the house was a thick, toxic fog. Jonathan and Chloe were clearly unnerved by my sudden passivity, unsure if it was surrender or something else. They began having more hushed, urgent conversations behind their closed bedroom door. I saw delivery boxes for baby items arriving, a stroller, a crib. They were accelerating their timeline, building their nest with my twigs. One evening, Chloe approached me with a document in her hand. It was printed on crisp, official-looking paper. "Alina, we need you to sign this," she said, her voice sickly sweet. "It's just a formality for the bank, to add Jonathan's name to the deed. It will make it so much easier for him to handle household repairs and things for you." My blood ran cold. This was it, the final play. They were moving to legally steal my home out from under me. I looked at the paper, then up at her, allowing a carefully practiced look of confusion to cloud my features. "Oh, my goodness," I said, my voice a frail tremor. "All this legal print. You know it gives me such a headache, dear, and my glasses are broken. Let me take it to my room and look at it in the morning light when my head is clearer." A flash of impatience crossed her face, but she forced a smile. "Of course, just don't forget, it's very important." I took the paper, my hand shaking perfectly on cue. I retreated to my room and closed the door, leaning against it, my heart pounding. I didn't need to read it to know what it was. I carefully folded it and placed it in my hiding spot, a slit I had cut in the underside of my mattress. Then I texted Martha from my secret phone. "They've made their move. The deed. I need that lawyer's number. Now." The battle was over. The war for my home had just begun. The recording was my Excalibur. Holding it, knowing the cold, coercive truth it contained, transformed the last vestiges of my fear into a cool, focused fury. I was no longer a ghost. I was a general preparing for the final battle. My command center, the small bedroom, was now a war room. The journal, the photos, the audio file, all of it was ammunition, and Mr. Gable was ready to help me fire the first shot. His strategy was brilliant and brutal. "We are not going to have a dramatic, screaming match, Alina," he explained over the phone. "We are going to use the law like a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. I am going to send a letter. It will be addressed to Jonathan with a copy to Chloe. It will be delivered by a process server to the house. I want them to be served in your home." The day the process server arrived was a masterpiece of quiet drama. It was a Tuesday. Jonathan was on the couch, scrolling through real estate listings on his tablet. Chloe was arranging a new, hideously expensive vase on the mantelpiece, having once again moved my wedding photo. I was in the kitchen, pretending to sort cutlery, my heart thundering in my chest. The doorbell rang. Jonathan, annoyed at the interruption, yelled, "Mom, get that." I didn't move. "I'm busy, dear," I called back, my voice steady. With a grunt, he heaved himself off the couch and yanked the door open. A man in a crisp uniform stood there. "Jonathan Miller." "Yeah, what is this?" "You've been served." The man handed him a thick, legal-sized envelope and a second, identical one. "And this is for Chloe Miller." The color drained from Jonathan's face. He took the envelopes, his hands trembling slightly. He slammed the door and stood with his back to it, staring at the documents as if they were venomous snakes. Chloe hurried over, her face a mask of confusion that quickly morphed into horror as she read her copy. The silence in the house was absolute, broken only by the rustle of paper. I continued to slowly, methodically, polish a teaspoon. What is this?" Jonathan finally whispered, his voice strangled. He spun around, his eyes wild, landing on me. "Mom, what did you do?" I placed the spoon down carefully and turned to face him. "I believe that is a letter from my attorney, Robert Gable," I said, my voice unnervingly calm. "It outlines the laws regarding elder financial abuse, duress, and illegal eviction. It also includes a formal demand for the immediate return of all my financial documents, a full accounting of every cent spent from my account since you arrived, and a cease and desist from any further contact regarding the deed to my home. You have 48 hours to comply before we proceed with a civil lawsuit and a report to the Adult Protective Services Division." The words hung in the air, legal and lethal. Chloe made a small, gasping sound. You can't do this," Jonathan sputtered, his face turning a mottled red. "This is my home, I'm your son." "You are a tenant who has overstayed his welcome and attempted to steal from his landlord," I replied, the words feeling like shards of glass in my mouth, but I spoke them clearly. "And this has not been a home since the day you marched in and declared it yours." The confrontation I had dreaded for weeks was here, but I was in control. The power had shifted. "You ungrateful old woman," Chloe shrieked, finding her voice. "After all we've done for you, we've put our lives on hold to take care of you." "You have done nothing but take," I said, my gaze locking onto hers. "You took my room, my money, my peace, and you tried to take my house. The care you offered was a prison sentence." Jonathan took a step toward me, his fist clenched around the legal papers. For a terrifying moment, I thought he would hit me. But he saw my expression, not fear, but cold, unwavering resolve, and he stopped. The legal document in his hand was a tangible reminder of the world of consequences that existed outside his greed. "This is not over," he snarled, but the threat was hollow, the bluster of a defeated man. "Oh, I think it is," I said softly. "You have 2 days. I suggest you start packing." I turned my back on them and walked to my room. I didn't slam the door. I closed it gently, a quiet, final period at the end of their sentence. Outside, I could hear their frantic, hushed arguing, the sound of their perfect world shattering. The tide had turned. The final eviction was about to begin. The 48 hours that followed were a study in silent, frantic activity on their side, and profound, peaceful reclamation on mine. I stayed in my room, but for the first time I left my door open a crack. It was a symbolic gesture, a way of saying, "This is my space, and I am no longer hiding." I could hear the sounds of their surrender, zippers on suitcases, angry whispers, the thud of boxes being packed. Mr. Gable's letter had been a miracle. It hadn't just threatened legal action. It had outlined, in chilling detail, the prison sentences associated with felony elder abuse in our state. The reality of handcuffs and a criminal record had proven to be a far more powerful motivator than any mother's plea. On the morning they were to leave, I got up early. I put on the pearl necklace David had given me for our 30th anniversary. I made a pot of strong coffee in the new, despised coffee maker, the rich aroma filling my kitchen. I was sitting at the table, sipping from my favorite mug, when they emerged from what was once my bedroom, looking haggard and defeated. They stood in the doorway, suitcases at their feet, their grand plans reduced to a pile of luggage on the Persian rug. Jonathan couldn't even look at me. He stared at the floor, a broken man, though I felt no pity, only a deep, weary sadness for the son I had lost. Chloe, however, still had a spark of defiance. "I hope you're happy," she spat, her voice brittle. "Alone in this big, empty house." I took a slow sip of my coffee, then placed the mug down with a deliberate click. "I have never been less alone," I said, my voice clear and strong. "I have myself back, and that is everything." They had no retort. Jonathan finally lifted his head, and for a fleeting second I saw a glimmer of the boy he used to be, lost and ashamed. But it was too late. The damage was done. "Goodbye, Jonathan," I said, the words a final, quiet benediction. He nodded once, a sharp, jerky motion, then picked up his bags and walked out the door without a backward glance. Chloe followed, her shoulders slumped in defeat. The sound of the front door closing behind them was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was not a slam of anger, but a soft, final click of closure. The silence that descended was not empty, it was full. It was filled with my own breath, my own thoughts, the memory of David's laughter in the walls. I was home. My first act was a reclaiming ritual. I walked to the living room, took down the abstract painting, and placed our wedding photo back on the mantel. I went to the garage, and with a strength I didn't know I still possessed, dragged David's armchair back to its spot by the fireplace. I called Mr. Henderson at the bank and began the process of restoring my accounts. I called a locksmith and scheduled an appointment to change every lock on the doors. The war was over. The healing could begin. My dear friends, my wonderful Betty's Stories family, this journey has been the most painful of my life. But sharing it with you, Knowing you were here, listening, has given me a strength I didn't know I had. This channel was built to share real-life moments, and you have been a part of this one. Your support, even silent, means the world. If this story of reclaiming my life and my home resonated with you, if it made you feel something, please let me know. Please, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a super thanks if you can. Your support helps me continue to share these stories, and it tells me I'm not alone. And I am so curious to know, where in the world are you watching from? Are you in a busy city, a quiet town, across the ocean? Please tell me in the comments where you're joining me from. Let's build this beautiful, global family of strong, resilient souls. This house is quiet again, but my heart is full. I fought for my sanctuary and I won. To anyone out there who feels their kindness is being mistaken for weakness, remember my story. Find your strength. Reclaim your keys. This is Alina, signing off with so much love and gratitude. Until the next story. With all my heart. Betty Sparkles.